Hi, Eman. Welcome to Procurement Without Border podcast. First of all, thank you so much for your time. So I know you are based in Egypt, but will you be able to provide, I would say, a bit more like background about you, and then like what brings you into the world of procurement?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me in this great podcast, The Procurement Without Borders. And I really love the title. It means it's very innovative title, by the way. My name is Eman Abouzeid. I am a procurement and supply chain professional with almost 21 years of extensive experience in procurement, purchasing, sourcing, logistics, and overall supply chain operations. My experience covers diverse industries, including chemicals, firefighting solutions, textile industry, paints industry, electrical and electronic manufacturing in both Egyptian and the multinational manufacturing organizations. So I work in global procurement, mainly within manufacturing environments, with experience in procuring production raw materials in both Egyptian and the multinational manufacturing organizations. To answer your question, what first attracted me to procurement career was that it sits at the intersection of business, people, strategy, and the problem solving. Procurement connects customer needs with supplier solutions. As you know, many people initially see procurement as just buying products or negotiating for the lowest prices or negotiating for the fastest delivery. But I quickly, during my career path, I quickly realized it has a much bigger impact. So procurement influences cost, operational continuity, supplier innovation, risk management, sustainability, and ultimately the competitiveness of the business itself. Actually, what also drawing me, it's the dynamic nature of the field. Every day is different. One day you are analyzing the market trends and supplier risks. Another day you are collaborating with operations, finance, suppliers, different types of stakeholder levels to solve a critical challenge. So over time, I especially became passionate about the strategic side of procurement, the strategic supplier relationship management, supplier performance, cross-functional alignment, and creating long-term value rather than focusing only on short-term savings. And also, what keeps me motivated is that procurement is constantly evolving. So it requires continuous learning, strategic curiosity, adaptability, and the strong human relationships.
No, I agree with you. And I think that's the bit where sometimes people might not think about a career in procurement, but then once they start, I would say this like the variety in terms of like activities you can do on a daily basis. They stick to it because of that in terms of, as you mentioned, one day you might be speaking with finance, but the other day you might be doing like supply chain resiliency and we're trying to understand if the suppliers you want to award a contract to is going to stay, I would say, in the durations of your contract. You mentioned you have like lots of experience in different industry.
Yes.
How has the like procurement function evolved since you started your career?
Procurement evolves. First of all, it focuses on communications with suppliers, managing transactional operations, negotiating. Then we move step by step into the strategic nature of the procurement. I mean, how to build a strong relationship with suppliers, how to think on the long run, how to maintain sustainability, how to maintain continuity of supply, how to avoid risks in and until we reach this era of uncertainty, risk, volatility, we start to become risk focused rather than focusing on the lowest price, the fastest delivery, something like this.
Okay, no, that's interesting. And how would you describe, I would say, the procurement landscape in Egypt today, and what makes it different from other regions?
Um, well, the procurement landscape in Egypt is becoming far more strategic actually than transactional.
Okay.
Organizations are focusing more on resilience, supplier
Okay.
partnerships, localization, and digital transformation as well, especially after recent global disruptions.
Yeah.
Procurement professionals here also develop a strong adaptability because they
Hmm.
often operate in rapidly changing circumstances, rapid changing market conditions. So
Yeah.
adaptability is very important.
Hmm.
Resilience, being risk focused, supplier relationship management is very important.
Hmm. Okay, that's interesting, and that's a good transitions for my next question is more like how, like considering recent global disruptions, like we had the pandemic about 6 years ago. You do have like geopolitical tensions, Iran, for instance, at the moment. Like, how do you adapt in your day to day?
Um, Actually, Egyptian organizations today are trying to build a balanced sourcing strategy rather than depending completely on either local suppliers or global vendors. Global suppliers are still very important, especially for
Hmm.
specialized raw materials and advanced technologies. But at the same time, many companies are increasingly investing in local supplier development to reduce dependency on imports, to shorten lead time as much as we can, reduce currency exposure, and improve supply chain resilience. So the balance usually comes to a few key factors: cost competitiveness, quality, supply continuity, lead time, foreign currency availability, technical capability, and risk exposure.
Okay. Okay. So what you are saying is that based on like recent, I would say, geopolitical event, health event, the procurement functions in Egypt is starting to be more like strategic, and it's really trying to like diversify the supply chain. So then you have like some global players, but you also have local ones. So the main aim, I would say, is to try to find the right balance between global and local suppliers. So then your supply chain is more resilient.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. And on that one, like, uh, can we develop a bit more? So, like, in terms of how do you balance the two? Does it depend based on your category? Depend on the spend? How do you like pick? I would say between like global and local suppliers.
Actually, as I said earlier, we depend on many factors: the cost competitiveness, the quality itself,
Mhm.
the supplier capabilities, supply continuity, lead time, short or long, the foreign currency availability, for example. If we can pay for a supplier in Egyptian pounds, so we can go in this side. The
Mhm.
technical capability, the raw material availability, the risk exposure, if the supplier is new to us and we don't have their technical capabilities, so we might prefer to go with a local supplier. Um, Situation like
Okay.
tension involving Iran disruption affecting energy markets and shipping routes. So
Mm.
procurement teams have become much more risk focused than before. Rising oil prices directly impact transportation, freight, packaging, chemicals, and many industrial inputs. So price instability quickly spreads across the supply chain. So to manage this volatility,
Mm.
organizations typically use several approaches like supplier diversification, dual sourcing strategies, maybe framework agreements for longer term contracts. Closer collaboration with suppliers is very important for visibility and forecasting. Also,
Yeah.
having buffer stock for high risk items, this is very important.
Mhm.
We try to focus on more frequent market monitoring and repricing mechanisms. Also considering total landed cost analysis instead of looking only at unit price. This is very important. So I think procurement in Egypt has become much more agile because of these
Mm.
continuous market disruptions.
Okay, I like what you've just said in terms of like it really emphasized the role procurement has nowadays in organizations in terms of like it's not anymore only about finding the cheaper suppliers, and it's really trying to like have a better understanding in terms of like how is the market at the moment. Do we need like longer contracts? What's the like total cost of ownerships, and really trying to better like manage risk. So procurement functions seems like is evolving towards something a bit more complex, where there are like different elements to consider before you actually make your purchase.
Yes.
And so you mentioned a point around supplier relationships. So how will you characterize supplier relationship in Egypt today? Are they more like transactional, partnership driven?
Um, well, I would characterize supplier relationships in Egypt as it's a hybrid or a mix of transactional and relationship-driven models, but with clear shift happening toward more structured partnerships. I
Mm-hmm,
mean, yeah, historically, supplier relationships in Egypt were often trust and familiarity based, helping with flexibility and speed in execution. In more mature organizations today, there is a shift toward structured supplier relationship management, including KPIs,
mm-hmm,
SLAs, performance reviews on regular basis, risk management tools. So
mm-hmm.
procurement is becoming more performance and accountability driven, not just relationship based. However, relationships will still matter significantly, especially for communication, responsiveness, and problem solving. So, to summarize, the overall trend is moving toward formal, performance
Mm-hmm.
based partnerships, while
Okay.
still preserving the human relationship aspects.
Okay. Okay. No, that's interesting. And perhaps questions I have is more like, in your day-to-day job, what's like to do that more like performance review partnership with your suppliers? How do you do it? Do you have like monthly meeting with them? Do you have like tracker in place?
Actually, for local suppliers, we have monthly or sometimes weekly meetings on regular basis. For global
Mm-hmm,
suppliers, we have periodic reviews, online periodic reviews, performance feedback on regular basis, communication on regular basis. So the feedback is two-way from us to them and from them to us, especially for technicalities, because we are very much concerned about the technicalities of raw materials.
yeah.
So the we can say the major aspect of dealing with our supplier, it depends mainly on communication on regular basis, and feedback, communication and feedback.
Communication. I like the fact you have a dual communication in terms of sometimes it can be more like the organization who is buying, who is going to do a performance review of the supplier, but then the supplier might have feedback, and sometimes organizations don't really listen to them. So I like that bit. So thank you so much for sharing. And perhaps questions for you is and more with that like managing these global suppliers. Are there like any misunderstanding from these global suppliers when they are working with Egyptian partners? What I mean is more like, are there any specific cultural elements that, from your perspective as working and living in Egypt, it makes sense, but for someone who is based in China, South Africa, and they work with you, it's not that clear.
Yeah, actually, that's a very interesting question, and we also face this challenge. We One common misunderstanding is assuming the procurement decisions in Egypt are driven only by price. This is one
Ah,
of
okay,
the
yep.
understanding. While in reality, relationships, trust, responsiveness, and flexibility also play a major role in business success.
Yeah.
Another misunderstanding is expecting the same speed of decision making everywhere. In some organizations, especially traditional or hierarchical structures or family business
Mhm.
organizations, approvals can be more centralized and require alignment across multiple levels of stakeholders, and sometimes the procurement decision may take a longer time. So it's
Oh,
centralized to some extent. So
yeah.
people expect the same speed of decision making everywhere, and I don't know why. We are still in the phase of centralized procurement and not delegating decisions so rapidly, like for example, mature organizations or
Mhm.
multinational organizations.
Okay. So what you are saying is around more the approval process that's like misunderstanding in terms of like how it works. So then perhaps that means more delay to get approval. Is that what you are saying?
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. And on that one, and aligning, I would say, with our discussion so far. So I know we briefly touched based around like digitalizations in procurement. I would love to have your thought about like next technologies so around AI, for instance. How is digitalization slash AI used in procurement in Egypt at the moment?
Well, I would say procurement digitalization in Egypt is in a growing but uneven maturity stage. Some organizations are quite advanced, while
Mhm.
others are still in its early stages of automations and system integration. I mean, in large multinational companies and some leading local enterprises, procurement is already integrated into broader ERP ecosystems like
Yeah.
SAP, Oracle-based platforms, where processes such as sourcing, purchasing, supplier management, and finance are connected end to end. We are
Mhm.
also seeing increased adoption of e-procurement platforms, spend analytics tools, and supplier performance dashboards, which are helping bring more structured transparency and control to the procurement decision. So I think AI is starting to shift procurement from descriptive reporting to predictive and prospective decision making. So
Mhm.
in more advanced organizations, it's being used for spend classification, risk identification, supplier insights, contract analysis,
Mhm.
and even support sourcing strategies.
Okay, interesting. So
So
is it?
AI.
Oh, sorry, go for it.
Okay, AI in procurement in Egypt is still in its early stage in most organizations.
Yep.
And I think the real constraint is often not the technology itself, but data quality, system integration, and the change management readiness.
Your view around how you are using AI, and it's more, do you want like how do you want the tool to help you? Would they be like if you could pick one activity that the AI tool could be doing for you, what would it be and why?
Actually, I hope AI can help us to remove the manual processing works and let procurement professional increase in their strategic role, more or less.
Okay. More on that one. No, that's a really good one, and that's more out of curiosity because you can see a lot of discussions around AI in procurement. Sometimes it's also like I agree with you in terms of like data quality, and if you don't have the data, then it's going to be more difficult to use AI. But sometimes it's also like around, do we actually need AI for that specific activity? So it's just trying to like understand from your perspective, I would say how AI can support your day-to-day job. So thank you so much for that. Then going to change a bit topic. I'm curious, I would say about sustainability. I would say in your country. So from a procurement perspective around sustainability, what are like the key activities, Eman, I would say?
Well, traditionally, procurement decisions in Egypt were primarily driven by cost, availability, and operational urgency. So
Mhm.
ESG and sustainability was not always a formal evaluation criteria in supplier selection. However, I think this is changing quite rapidly. ESG in procurement in Egypt is no longer optional or theoretical. It's emerging and increasingly important, but I think it's still in the transition phase from, compliance-driven adoption to fully strategic integration. However, I believe the direction is clear. Over time, ESG will become a standard part of supplier evaluation alongside cost, quality, and risk, not separate from them.
Okay. Okay. And in your day-to-day jobs, how do you include sustainability? So, like, I'm going to give an examples, but so I'm working in public procurement, and if I go to tender and I need to select a supplier, I need to ask a set of questions around sustainability just to make sure that it's something we have considered. For yourself in your day-to-day job, how do you like use sustainability in practice?
Well, actually, sometimes we go to, another customer reviews about the supplier to check their capability to supply on regular basis, to supply on during disruption or urgent times. This is
Mhm.
in order to preserve the continuity of supply. So we don't go with a supplier until we check this part, their supply capability on regular basis. They can supply orders, urgent orders.
Mhm.
Their capacity is very important. So this is the part I think we depend on in order to ensure sustainability.
Okay. Okay. No, that's really a good point. So thanks for sharing. Perhaps next question I have for you is more like looking ahead 5, 10 years from now. How do you see procurement in Egypt evolving, and what excites you more about the future?
Okay, that's very interesting question. I can see procurement gain greater recognition as a true strategic partner in the business,
Mhm.
rather than only a support function or a cost cutter function.
Mhm.
I'm excited about how technology can enhance procurement capabilities, not replace people, but allow professionals, as I said earlier, to focus more on strategy, collaboration, and
Mhm.
innovation and the relationship building.
Yeah.
So I overall believe procurement in Egypt has a strong potential to become more globally connected, resilient, and influential in shaping business competitiveness.
Okay. Okay. No, that's really good sharing. And I agree with you. I think it's that element where the messaging and how we position procurement as a more like strategic functions is definitely key. And then still on that element around like timelines is more like around skills and capabilities. So I know at the moment there is a questions around how do you bring more young people in procurement. So in terms of like skills and capabilities, what are the most valued in procurement professional in Egypt, and how is the talent landscape evolving?
Well, procurement roles were heavily focused on negotiations, sourcing execution, supplier follow-up, and cost control. And these
Yeah.
are still very important, by the way, but they are no longer sufficient on their own.
Mhm.
So I think today, especially in more mature and multinational organizations in general, the most valued capabilities, including strategic thinking,
Mhm.
the commercial and business acumen,
Yeah.
supplier management, and relationship building,
Mhm.
uh, data literacy, and the analytical thinking skills, risk management and resilience thinking. This is very important.
Okay.
Cross-functional collaboration and communication, and the ability to handle different types of stakeholder levels of fractions. Sorry, fraction or friction.
Yeah, very base. It's yeah, it's more like different type of stakeholders, and they are not. Sometimes they are not all nice people, and they are going to push back. So it's the friction element, and how do you adapt your communication based on each stakeholder you are speaking with?
Exactly, this is what I mean. Digital procurement skills as well, familiarity with ERP systems like SAP, like Oracle, like e-procurement tools,
Mhm.
increasing importance of AI and automation awareness. And from my own perspective, I believe the most important skill is emotional intelligence.
Okay,
Procurement
interesting.
requires
Yeah.
emotional intelligence because,
Okay.
as I just say, we have critical challenge in dealing with different kind of stakeholders. There is a lot of friction between stakeholder management and the procurement team, top
Mhm.
management, production lines, finance, logistics, everything. So this require this tension, this kind of tensions require emotional intelligence. This is very important.
Okay. Okay, no, that's interesting, and I like what you're mentioning is that you to be a good procurement professional, you need that mix between like art skills. So I know you mentioned like data literature, business aspect, but then you also have the more like soft skills elements. And I would agree with you, emotional intelligence is a key one, and it's more I think around. I mean, like gut feeling is not the right term, but more like being able to read a room, or you go to a call and you can sense a bit how the stakeholder is feeling. So stakeholder management is going to be key. But I agree with you, it's more like different element around soft skills and how do you like have an understanding of what's going on and being able to manage the stakeholders. So let's say a student comes to you and they ask you if you have one advice to like what would be like one advice you will give to a young professionals who are considering a career in procurement and supply chain?
Say continuous learning. Continuous learning
Okay.
is very important.
Yep.
Um, Also to have the strategic curiosity.
Okay.
Um, what else? To strongly build a network, to have a mentor. Uh,
Mm.
what
Well,
else?
how come the mentor? Would like so I'm asking the questions because based on my experience in certain companies, you are going to have a mentor, but he's more there to represent you at panel discussions, for instance. So are you saying procurement professionals should seek mentor perhaps outside of their organization? What should they ask?
I actually sometimes I suggest finding mentors, including your in if you have a LinkedIn account and you have a strong network of procurement and supply chain peers, so you can learn from the experienced professionals who share their insights on regular basis. This kind of mentorship, this is very important. You can ask, for example. The leaders in the field. LinkedIn network is very important.
Okay.
Your online presence is very important. So you can, and I did it myself, by the way. I asked people who
Yep.
are dominant in the field about their advice, their
Yep.
what can I do in this part? For example, how can I pass this interview? So I always ask it. I
Yep.
used to ask leaders in the field, CBOs,
Ah,
about their advice. So
okay.
the networking is very important in this
Okay.
in this. This is why I'm trying to stress on building strong foundations in communication and relationship management.
Okay. Okay.
Not
That's
only with
interesting.
not only with
Okay.
suppliers, but with the leaders in the field, the peers
Okay.
who
Okay. So
have, yes.
like like-minded people who are like in procurement, they can be like inside but also outside your organization, and then you learn from them based on the experience that's likely to be different from yours.
Yes, and by the way, building confidence through preparation and experience, and focusing on creating value continuously inside your organization or outside your organization, as
Mm-hmm.
just said, sharing insights on regular basis. And I have been sharing my insights on LinkedIn for almost 9 years now, from articles to
Wow.
posts to situations.
Yeah.
So I have learned, what I have learned is that your nothing could be everything to someone else. Your very small piece of information on or knowledge you put on LinkedIn could
Mm.
be something very big for someone else. When I share insights, earlier
Mhm.
in my LinkedIn journey, I received a message from a fresh graduate or someone who she has started her procurement career
Yeah.
and asked me. She said to me, I answered an interview question very well today because you shared this information on your LinkedIn, among your LinkedIn
Ah,
posts. So this makes me feel that I'm helping people.
yeah.
I feel that I'm influential in my field.
Mhm.
So don't underestimate the value of your voice, your perspectives, your expertise, your situations, your ups and downs. Try to share these on LinkedIn
Okay.
to
Okay.
build
That's
to build your online presence. And
yep.
this actually, I have been nominated as one among 100 top most influential supply chain women in Africa for two times. The first one
Okay.
back in 2021, and the second
Yep.
time is this year in 2026. So this is very important, sharing insights your own to take care of your
Yep.
online presence.
Okay, no, and I've seen it before, like for preparing for the discussions, and I love it in terms of like I like when you have like proactive procurement professionals and they share, would say their thoughts, and I think it's important, and it's also more like how do you reach other type of people, more in terms of like sometimes like your students might not know about procurement and supply chains, and then they go on LinkedIn and they see this type of post. So that's really like a way to try to engage more on social media. And then how do you bring more people, I would say, within the professions? But perhaps another question I have for you is more around, do you think we have, I don't know how to say it, but sometimes we can be working in more like male environment dominated sectors. So do you think we should like bring more women on board? And if yes, how do we do it?
Well, actually, as you know, the profession is now evolving.
Mhm.
So more organizations start to recognize the value of diverse perspectives bring to procurement and supply chain function.
Mhm.
So the conversation shouldn't is no longer men versus women. The best teams are built on mutual respect, capability, collaboration. Procurement today requires much more than technical skills alone. It requires, as I said earlier, emotional
Mhm.
intelligence, collaboration, adaptability, communication,
Mhm.
stakeholder relationship management, and strategic thinking. And I think these strengths many women can bring strongly into the profession. So the organizations now recognize the value that diverse perspective can bring a lot of
Mhm.
value to the function instead of basically depending on meals only in the profession.
No, no, I mean, I agree with you in terms you need different type of people, different type of backgrounds. That's what makes the team the best team. So no, I agree with you on that statement. I mean, perhaps one last question for me is more like, are there like any best practices based on your experience or anything else you would like to share today?
Um, my best practice would be always try to align procurement decisions with overall business objectives. Procurement should support the strategy, not operate in isolation. Another thing is to focus on total value, not only the lowest price. Cost, quality, risk, continuity, and supplier capability should all be considered together. Uh, Also, try to build stronger supplier relationships based on both trust and collaboration and clear performance accountability. Diversify sourcing strategies to reduce dependency and
Mhm.
improve resilience during disruptions.
Okay.
Another issue to strengthening cross-functional collaborations with all different levels of stakeholders, including finance, operations, planning, logistics, top management. Strong human relationships are often what make procurement strategies successful in practice. And the last piece of advice, or the last piece of best practice, I would say, treat your supplier the same way as you treat your customers, because we still here in Egypt, unfortunately, some organizations treat suppliers as
Mhm.
they are enemies. Meanwhile, suppliers are partners and they should be treated with the same importance as customers. So this is a game changer, by the way. And I always implement this concept in my work. Treat supplier the same with the same importance as you treat your customers.
That's interesting. Okay, so really more having that like collaborations with your supplier instead of considering the suppliers can be replaced by any other suppliers and really developing that relationship with that supplier.